Clay Shumake, welcome to the Preconstruction Podcast.
Gareth, thanks for having me on, man. Looking forward to it.
Look
Excited to
at
talk
that.
to you today.
Look at that young, fresh face. That's what we want on the podcast. Today's episode is all about the subcontractor, specifically masonry. Now, believe it or not, Clay's background as well is from the electrical side of things, having spent 7 years as an electrical contractor. So we're going to go through that. We're going to talk about his education, and we're going to talk masonry construction. So let's get started, Clay. Talk to me. Appalachian State University, was it always going to be construction for you, or who influenced you to make that decision?
So for me, through school, honestly, construction was never on my radar. I grew up around it, had a grandfather and a father both in the electrical business, and I was around it, never really thought it was for me. I actually wanted to be a physical therapist, and I went to school up there and spent one semester in that program, and I quickly realized that maybe this wasn't for me. Came home, worked in the field with the electrical contractor, just digging ditches, grunt work, making up receptacles, and just came to found that this is awesome. And I wanted to, pursue the office side of that. So as soon as I got back, I actually started the process during that winter break, switching over to the construction management program. And then that spring semester, I jumped right in.
Love it. And talk to me, building services. Was that all to do with the internal workings of the building, or what kind of degree, or what did you learn basically?
So the building sciences program at App, it's actually a great program. We do a lot of hands-on stuff. So the intro programs, you start, say year one, you're going to have an intro lab where you do some framing, learn that kind of stuff, different systems, framing, sheathing, drywall, the whole nine. You don't really get into the MEPs yet at that time. And you'll go through that. There's some estimating classes along with that. Um, Also statics, physics, those things. And then when you get into years, really three and four, you get into your MEPs, some hiring classes. But that program, we covered the whole building, every system, but also project management, estimating. They kind of got you well versed in different aspects of construction. So I felt the program was really well tooled to prepare us for the real world.
Brilliant. I'm delighted to hear that, because one of the biggest reasons that I asked that question is to find out how much focus or emphasis was put on estimating and pre-construction. So that's brilliant. So after that, obviously you went out into the big bad world, found the electrical contractor. Was it a case of you went then, did the MEP side and said, you know what, this is the electrical side is somewhere that I can relate to. Maybe it was your parents that influenced that. What enticed you to the electrical side?
That I started there, they gave me the opportunity to work, while I was in school, come home on winter breaks and summer breaks and work with them. So when I was coming out of school, I interviewed with, general contractors, did not interview with any other subs, was, either electrical or going to go into the GC side. And, they were so good to me and I enjoyed what I was doing through those years that when I came out of college, I was like, I'm going to try this electrical contracting for a while. My grandfather's done it. My dad's done it, and it's still something I'm super interested in. And it was a great trade. And I knew, being that it's, I would say one of the more involved trades, I knew I would get a lot of experience that would still translate to the GC world if I wanted to pivot or make a move later.
Brilliant. And I love that, because you went in literally at the bottom, assistant electrician. How was that, and what was the thinking behind that?
So I went in as the assistant electrician actually while that's what I did while I was in school. So throughout those 4 years of school, those especially the first 3 years I was in the field, worked on a couple different job sites, even went, there was a period of time where I rode around with some of the service guys to some hospitals, just doing small service projects, learning different sides of the business. And then about my junior year, into junior year, as I was getting ready for internships and stuff, they moved me into the office and I actually slid right into the pre-construction side of things. That's where they put me. And I found that, I spent a little time there. I was like, this is kind of what I want to do. I've been around project management, honestly, more previously. That's what my dad and my grandfather had always done. So I knew enough about project management, really didn't know nothing about pre-con, and had a great pre-con manager, was a great teacher, and just went with it from there.
Love it, because you did almost just over 4 years as estimator for that. Because I mean, was it your skills that allowed you there, or did your pre-con manager see something in you that you thought, you know what, you're better suited to this side?
I think for me, one thing, I've always been kind of outgoing and I talk a lot. So I think, they saw that because the pre-con role, especially for a lot of us as subcontractors, it's a business development role too. So you're getting out there and try to meet with these clients and GCs and get your name out there and sell your company. Because you may not always be the cheapest price on a project. So you want to sell your value. And I think the pre-com manager saw that that was a skill I had, could come in and help. And then I've always been gifted with numbers as far as, putting stuff together. I've been able to kind of eyeball stuff, even in the construction where once I got my head wrapped around it, I can kind of throw numbers together. It's just something that my brain's always excelled with the numbers, and it slid right in, and it's been a great, great career for me.
Well, that is a nice mix there. You're sociable, outgoing, extrovert, and you're good with numbers. You're the perfect estimator.
Yep, yep. I think that's what he saw in me, and he moved me in. And I actually, the some of the guys that were in the estimating team at the time, not every estimator is the outgoing type. So I think it gave a little bit of balance because there's a lot of pre-con guys that just want to estimate behind the scenes, and that's it.
Yeah, you're more front of office BD, getting
Yeah.
it done, working with the client. Brilliant. And then you made the switch from electrical sub to masonry sub. How did that come about?
Um, Really, I just, I kind of got, to be honest, a little bit bored in my current position. I did it. I was really at that time there for 7 years and had been at that company. And there was definitely a future for me there, but I saw, maybe I want to try something different and kind of broaden my horizons. I wasn't really pursuing the electrical contracting license, that wasn't really something I was pursuing. I wanted to try another trade, and Gates was actually right around the corner from my old office. So I knew who they were and was on LinkedIn one day. And I actually saw the post like 15 minutes after they posted and immediately called and was like, hey, can I come in for an interview? Certainly. That we came in and sat down with these guys and they told me about what they did. And at the time, I don't know anything about masonry. I was super intrigued and I felt like they had a good team and a good leader to help, teach me that side of things. So I took the leap and I couldn't be happier with masonry. I found that as fun as electrical contracting was, I think I've really found my passion in the masonry side.
Good. I'm delighted to hear it because I mean that tells a story in itself, and it's something that's common to all the podcasts that I do is being able to see something or be given an opportunity and just throw yourself at it, not knowing what's going to happen. And tell us now. I mean, a lot of GC pre-construction managers, estimators will be listening to that. What is the biggest fundamental kind of misconception about masonry construction?
I think a lot of people, to be honest, and I heard it when I was on the electrical side, people just think a dumb old mason. They think mason's not really a skill. Some people don't look at it as a skilled trade, but I would encourage them to go watch these guys and watch what they do on a day-to-day basis, and I think it's actually one of the more skilled trades. I mean, these guys are hard-working men. It's one of the tougher trades. It's labor intensive. So it's just that's kind of where I'm at.
So in the same way as the electrical side is struggling for electricians at the minute, how are you guys seeing the next generation of masons? Is there plenty coming through the skilled trade school?
That's kind of that. So that's something, I spend time in North and South Carolina. And actually in South Carolina, I'm acting as the vice president of the South Carolina Masonry Association.
Nice.
And North Carolina has a North Carolina Masonry Contractors Association, which has been an amazing association. They do a ton to promote the trades in the schools, and they are doing a great job in North Carolina of promoting masonry, bringing kids up. And there's a handful of contractors up in that area that are handing these kids jobs right out of school. We're trying to build that up in South Carolina, but that's really what we've noticed is the way to get more masons. You have to get into these schools and, get these teachers in the trade programs to really push masonry because it's something that gets overlooked a lot of the time. So trying to get this into the schools, help them promote it. We'll go by there, provide materials, whatever they need. And we found, if you'll stay consistent and show them that as an industry, you want to help and bring kids into this industry, they'll continue to push your program.
I love it. Yeah. And then we need to do more of that as well. Not enough of the trades. They're leaving it to everyone else to try and get fill the lack of resources, the lack of people. But we've got to take responsibility, everybody, to go out, shout about
Yeah.
it, speak to the local schools. So talk to
Well,
me now. Go ahead, sorry.
I was gonna say, and I've noticed, with the especially going to these schools recently, you'd be surprised. I think we are seeing a shift a little bit now of kids getting back interested in the trades. I can really tell when I go to these classrooms. There's a lot of kids that their ears perk up when you start talking about the type of money they can make or the career opportunities. Because a lot of kids don't understand that. Yeah, you might come in and work in the field as a mason or as an electrician, whatever you do, you may work in the field for some years, but there's other opportunities and ways you can build yourself and build your skill set, up through the ranks.
Exactly. I mean, like you did. I mean, falling in the estimating and pre-construction, finding that nice little area where your skills match perfectly with what you were passionate about. And talk to me now if the pre-con and estimators and the GC side are listening here, because you talked about pre-recording here, talked about a lot of interesting things when it came to masonry, the likes of the veneers, the likes of types, how the tariffs are affecting that. Then we talk about the likes of how they need to be water sealant to make sure that water doesn't come in, the old historical projects. Tell me what you're seeing now in the masonry world.
In the masonry world, right now there's a lot of new products coming out. I have noticed that, and the thin veneers is something that's becoming extremely popular. And the thin veneers, that's been something we've learned to navigate, I guess, in the masonry industry because it's not a typical masonry product. A lot of these thin veneers go on a tab system or a scratch coat system, and you grout the joints in after whatever it may be. And those are becoming more popular. It almost seems monthly. You start to see more and more of those types of jobs come through. So those are, that's one type of veneer that I've seen coming around a lot more that people are going to. I think a lot of times the architects look at it and think it's possibly a cheaper option, but it's actually much more expensive than doing a traditional masonry veneer because it is labor intensive. Like I say, it's kind of a two-step process. You're putting your backing up, getting the brick on the wall, and then you have to come grout the joints in after. So, you're adding steps to the process, adding labor and the material. I think an architect looks at it sometimes and sees that it's a thin brick. It's 1 inch thick rather than a 4 inch bed depth. But a lot of manufacturers, they're just cutting a face off of a brick, so it's actually more labor intensive for them to do that.
Yeah, it makes sense, and not only that, I mean, authenticity of a proper brick and the way it sits and the way it feels. Surely that's better, especially if it's cheaper.
I would say so, and I think it looks better, structurally. There's not, and obviously a veneer, there's no structural integrity to it, but you get your cavity behind. I think it's a better system, and then when you're doing like a wood frame building, you get into if the substrate behind the thin brick has any irregularities in it, you'll see that in the brick kind of right offhand. Whereas if you've got a standard veneer with a 2 inch cavity or whatever, some of that, we can change the ties a little bit throughout to keep that veneer, running flush.
Love it. And what about solutions to keep out water? It seems to be a big problem.
Yeah, I see that. That's something we see a lot. The biggest thing is, especially on new builds, is getting your flashing details right, and a lot of times, a flashing detail may not be perfect when you see it, in my side, on the estimating side. And, that's where our field team will come in. And, you got to work with the architects, designers, and GCs to make sure that you're getting a good flashing system. But I would say, that's probably one of the most important parts of the whole masonry system is when our guys are putting in flashing, you want to have a very a watchful eye over it, because that's going to get any water that gets in that cavity. Because brick is essentially a sponge. Water is going to get into the cavity, so you've got to have a way to get it out and let that building breathe. With the historical renovations that you mentioned, a lot of times down here, especially in South Carolina and Charleston, with these mass masonry walls, buildings that are 100 years old, there's no cavity there, so there's no way to flash those buildings. So what we've found is you can do point up and patching of the brick, and that'll help alleviate some of these problems on the old buildings. But sometimes And you don't really want to have to do this, but you just use like a siloxane product and coat the building in the brick veneer, at the end of the project. That way it gives it a sealant, and we don't like to do that necessarily because it does take away from the brick a little bit, and it's only going to last, 10 years. You're probably going to have to do that again down the road. But sometimes if you want to preserve that historical building, that's your best solution.
Interesting, because I would imagine there's a lot of that both in South Carolina and North Carolina. Is just basically people wanting to knock down an existing building or part of a building. How easy is it to reuse that material?
It's very difficult with, like, if you have a demo contractor coming in that's going to demo a building and you're expecting them to salvage masonry products brick for us. It's really difficult. I mean, because they're just going to demo it down, and if we're going to be asked to salvage it, we like to demo it ourselves, and it's a tedious process, because you've got to clean each brick, get the mortar off, make sure you're going to have a lot of damaged bricks, and you'd think you could just chip the mortar right off, but you might have 300 bricks sitting on the ground. By the time you get done cleaning them, you've got 75 left that you can put back on the wall later. So, we look at it a lot of times as putting new materials back. And that's what's great about the masonry industry is there's so many different manufacturers of brick, especially, here in the United States, that when we do have projects that are historical and we need to match the existing brick, I mean, you've got tons of options of who you can reach out to, and there's even companies that actually just sell reclaimed brick down here in the Low Country. There's a company that they palletize reclaimed brick from various buildings around town throughout the years, and that way, if you need a pallet of some brick that nobody can match, they may have it.
Very good. That's what we want. We want people reusing stuff to help the environment. And then talk to me as well about this kind of little bit of beat you're getting from the electrical trades now that you moved away into the masonry trades. And tell us a fun story about your father.
Well, with electrical construction, when they're putting their conduits in the wall, they really do not like the masons, especially when we're doing some projects and all the walls, interior walls are masonry. So everything they've got to get into the wall they've got to coordinate with our guys. And, my dad's still in the electrical contracting business, and he's a project manager, oversees some project managers, and we are on a project together now. I'm not PMing it or anything, but I was involved in the pre-con of the project and know a lot about it. And, it is funny. I'm going this weekend and I'm sure I'll see him and he'll have something to say to me about, you guys are holding me up or this and that. It's friendly banter, but always a little back and forth. I think that's a difficult thing for the electricians. I think anytime they got to deal with masons, that makes their job a lot harder. I will give them that. I mean, definitely makes their job harder. Its coordination is key.
Yeah, you've been there, you've done that as well. You've got a little bit of empathy for them. How is it though? How difficult is it coordinating? And would you know a lot of the subs down in South Carolina, North Carolina that you're working with, or would it be a case of you just got to get in there and work with whoever you see?
You'll see if you have, like, some of our GC clients that we work with on a more continue, that are more repeat clients we're doing a lot of projects with, you will see some overlap of, they're kind of using maybe not the same subs every time, but, the same group of subs you're running into. So in Charlotte, I would say, we're pretty aware when we see another sub on a job with us of, we know kind of how they operate or we've worked with them before. Down here in South Carolina, in my office here in Charleston, we're new to the area, so we're constantly running across new subs. But I will say, I have not really had any, issues come up with, as far as coordination with other subs down here. Everything has been really smooth, and I think everybody's been extremely professional.
Brilliant. I love to hear that. So talk to me now. What are you seeing challenges wise? We mentioned the tariffs there. What excites you about the masonry construction industry, and what are going to be the biggest challenges over the next 5 or 6 years?
To touch on tariffs quickly, luckily with masonry right now, a lot of our bricks, as I mentioned earlier, and block is manufactured here in the States. There is aggregates and stuff that may come from overseas, but that helps, for us tariff wise. Right now, I think our biggest thing we're keeping track of is rebar. For,
Yeah.
when we're doing structural CMU walls, rebars always, and steel's always fluctuating, but that's something, we have to keep an eye on. And then challenges over the next 5 years is kind of what we touched on earlier. I actually think my biggest challenge is the labor force,
Yeah.
is making sure you keep a qualified labor force. Superintendents and supervision, it's always hard to find for any trade. Um, and it's only going to become harder to find if we don't get kids into these trades and, build them up. It's not just get a kid in the trade, put him on a job site, and you just want him. You shouldn't want, a kid, you put him out there, you shouldn't want him just to be a brick mason forever. You should want to see him, move into a foreman, superintendent, maybe even a project manager or whatever. So you want to get these kids in and build them up, so you have supervision in the future and you're not running around trying to find it later.
Yeah, I mean, it's oversight, isn't it? It's getting them to have a look at construction and just basically make it as an option, whether it be the trades or an engineer or a pre-construction or a project manager. It's just because too many times the IT industry had its day. The Facebooks, the Googles made working in IT sexy, and now I think it's the construction's time, because you see with AI and Chat GPT and all of this, it's coding, it's developing, it's doing all those things that the kids 3-4 years ago went to school to do. So I think it's a great time for construction, and I think if we strike while the iron's hot, as in school children aren't being pushed into IT degrees because there's a little bit of unknown what's going to happen. If they were to be put into construction, we could have a nice, solid, healthy workforce.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean that's extremely important. And like when I was in school, I mean, I don't ever think, construction was really outside of being around it, in my home life because of my parents. I don't really know if it was ever even brought up to me in school, to be quite honest with you, and that's sad. You want to see, that you want to see the teachers and the instructors pushing that more on kids, or at least maybe not pushing it, but showing them all the avenues that are out there. It's not just tech, like you said, or the next big thing. There's Construction's been around for a long time and it's going to be around for a lot longer. So, it's an industry that's constantly growing.
Yeah, and if you look at the deficit, what we have to build, the amount of homes, hospitals, data centers, manufacturing, I mean, the amount of work that has to be done over the next couple of decades, you'd be crazy not to get into it.
Yep, I completely agree.
And tell me now, what markets are you guys in? What markets do you like to work in? Are you education focused, renovations?
We do a little bit of everything. Obviously, the multifamily sector for the last few years has been great. Been something we've done a ton of multifamily. The industrial is always good. We do chase that. Hospitals. The only thing we really don't do is true residential. Now, some people kind of look at multifamily as residential from time to time, depending on the type of building. Um, but we just don't really venture into that sector with residential. But everything else, renovations, industrial, higher education, public education, all that stuff we are involved in.
Brilliant. And are you seeing more GCs reaching out to you now in the local area? I mean, how's the backlog for you guys?
The backlog has been great, and I'll say, we this Charleston location, we opened it in September of 2023, and the partners we have down here in Charleston, I couldn't be more thankful for the GCs that have not only, signed us up for projects and tried us out on jobs, but also the guys that we knew from North Carolina that have helped spread our name around town, or whatever it is. It's helped get our backlog going and get us off our feet down here. And it's a lot of the same GC partners from North Carolina, so that was a benefit. But I think these guys have been great and love working with most of these contractors down here.
Yeah, word of mouth. That's what it's all about, isn't it? Um,
Yep, yep.
Tell me about pre-con tech now in the masonry world. What are you guys using? What's your tech stack?
So on the tech side, there's all kinds of different softwares out there you could chase, and we've tried a couple recently. Our primary software that most of us use now is PlanSwift, and I'll use that in tandem. I still use Bluebeam for certain things. Bluebeam is one of the greatest tools, in my opinion, for our industry. So I definitely still use Bluebeam, but PlanSwift, it's a fairly basic on-screen takeoff system. And for masonry, we're mainly pulling linear footages, square footages, but it allows you to run 3 or 4 screens at a time. You can have a detail up here, floor plan here, elevation here, and move around pretty easily. And then once we do a takeoff, digitally, we're putting it into our Excel sheets, and those Excel sheets are built out from years. Other guys have worked on them. I've, over the years tailored them to fit me, and we constantly change them as the industry changes. But we input our information into those, and that's really our software. Really is the Excel sheet is kind of the software for us that you put in your quantities of square footages, linear footages, and it's gonna turn that into, how many brick, how many block, how many tons of rebar, how many wall ties. It's gonna figure all that for you.
Brilliant, brilliant. And do you see any new shiny tools coming out or something that's catching your eye?
Yeah, there's a program called Stack that we've played around with recently that I'm a little bit intrigued with. We've got one estimator that been with us 6 months or so now, and he actually brought it to my attention when he came on board and was like, "Have you ever checked out the software?" And I haven't played around with it enough myself, but I know he even had some assemblies built out where, an 8-inch CMU wall, he can put in and it'll tell him how many yards of grout go in that wall and this and that without putting it into our Excel sheet. So, that's pretty cool. There's not many softwares I feel like are tailored for masonry. He's kind of building that out himself. That's what's a little unfortunate. Coming from the electrical side, there was a handful of softwares that are tailored specifically for that industry and makes it easy. But we're constantly we don't, if we get calls from another software company, I always, entertain it, get their information packet. I'm always interested to see what the new tech is out there.
Yeah, you gotta stay ahead of the game. You gotta stay in the know. So tell me now, what's the biggest pet hate for a masonry contractor when it comes to working with GCs? What would you like the GCs to do better?
Our biggest thing, when we're on a project that I see that can hold us up or, affect profitability of projects, it's really when with a brick veneer, it's when you get to the veneer side of things of making sure there's enough space ready to make the masons productive. There's a lot of times where a project may fall behind schedule and there's 100 square foot of wall that they need to get brick on, which is great. But if there's another 1,000 square foot right next to it, we'd like to get all that at once because it's hard. They may look at a wall and say, well, you could put 8 masons over here, but if you put 8 masons on a certain area, it kind of gets counterproductive at a certain point. So you got to make sure it's really having the real estate to keep the guys busy is our biggest thing. Just sequencing, be patient. Our stuff may fall behind the schedule a little bit as, hey, the mason was supposed to be on site, but we may come out there and look and say, hey, let's wait a couple weeks because, yeah, we might seem like we're behind on this wall, but if you get this wall ready and then this one's ready too, we'll get them all, we'll catch right back up to the schedule. So that's the good thing. As a mason, we can kind of make up the schedule, quickly like that. As we get more real estate, we can actually move quicker typically. So that's better.
There you are. There you have it, GCs. This is how to work with with a masonry contractor. Work with them and trust them. Brilliant. This has been really, really good, Clay. Really enjoyed it. Is there anything else you want to touch on before we head off?
I think we've touched on about all of it. I really appreciate your time today and thank you for having me on.
Wonderful. And if there's anybody listening now that says, you know what, Clay's touched on a couple of things that I would like to ask more questions on, where's the best place to get you?
The best place to reach me is you can email me at clay, CLAY SHUMAKE at gatesconsco.com. That's GATESCONSTCO.com. And you can reach me there. I'll be happy, if you've got masonry questions or anything that we can assist in, feel free to reach out.
Brilliant, Clay. And I will put that in the show notes below, folks, if you're listening and you wanna grab that email. So, Clay, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for the rundown on masonry construction.
Hey, thank you for having me on again. This is a great opportunity. I appreciate it.